Betrayal at 3 a.m. You're nothing but a failure. I'm taking the kids and every last cent. My wife spat, her voice cold and final. Her brother smirked, eyes filled with disdain as he dragged his car keys across the side of my vehicle. Pathetic, he muttered before stepping into his luxury SUV. I didn't react. Not yet. But within 48 hours, they realized their mistake. I still remember the exact moment my world shattered. It was a Tuesday evening, nothing out of the ordinary. After another long shift at the automotive repair shop, where I had worked as a mechanic for over a decade, I pulled into our quiet suburban driveway. My wife's brother's high-end SUV was parked out front, but I thought little of it. He visited often, though I never enjoyed his company. The moment I stepped inside, I felt something was off. My wife, 36, and her brother, 42, sat at the kitchen table, a thick stack of papers between them. Their expressions were impossible to miss. Contempt mixed with a twisted sense of triumph. "We need to talk," my wife said, her tone sharper than I'd ever heard before. I set down my lunchbox and keys. "What's going on?" She slid the papers toward me. "I'm filing for divorce." I stood frozen, struggling to process her words. 13 years of marriage. 2 children, our 10-year-old daughter and 7-year-old son. We had weathered rough patches, especially when my hours were cut back for 3 months, but things had turned around. I was working full-time again. The bills were getting paid. "I don't understand," I finally said. She let out a humorless laugh. "Of course you don't. You never do. You're a failure, and I'm done wasting my life on you. I'm taking the kids and everything we have." Her brother stood then, towering over me at 6 feet 3 inches, dressed in his designer clothes, oozing arrogance. He had always looked down on me, the blue-collar mechanic who had married his sister, a real estate developer with an inflated ego. He never missed an opportunity to remind me of my supposed shortcomings. "She deserves better," he sneered. "She always has. You've been dragging her down for years." That's when I learned the full extent of their betrayal. My wife had emptied our personal bank account that morning. All $8,700 that was meant for the mortgage, our kids' activities, and the vacation we had planned. On top of that, she had taken the $22,000 in emergency cash we kept in the home safe. As I stood there, still trying to grasp the reality of it all, my brother-in-law deliberately brushed past me on his way out. I followed him, still in shock, and watched as he pulled out his keys and scraped them along the side of my 12-year-old Toyota, the car I had finally finished paying off last year. "Pathetic," he muttered as he climbed into his SUV. "Just like you." Inside, my wife had already packed. Her bags were by the door, along with the kids' belongings. She told me they would be staying at her brother's place until I figured out where to go. According to her, I had 2 weeks to move out because she wanted a house. She claimed her attorney assured her she could take everything. That night, I sat alone in the silence of our home, surrounded by framed family photos and the fading illusion of what I once believed was a happy marriage. I called my sister, who lived an hour away. Without hesitation, she offered me her spare bedroom. But I wasn't ready to leave, not yet. I needed to understand how this happened, what my next move should be. The next morning, I called in sick to work, something I rarely did. My first priority was meeting with a divorce attorney. I couldn't afford much, but uncovering the truth. I scraped together $300 for an initial consultation, charging it to my credit card. The attorney, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, listened to my story attentively, her expression unreadable. "So, your wife drained the joint account without warning and moved in with her brother, taking your children with her?" she asked, jotting down notes. "Yes," I confirmed. "She claims her lawyer told her she can take everything, the house, full custody, even my retirement." The attorney arched an eyebrow. "Did she give you the name of this attorney?" I shook my head. She set her pen down and leaned forward. "I need you to do something important. Document everything. When she took the money, when she left, every message or call between you two. Don't delete any texts or emails. Also, gather bank statements showing withdrawal." Following her advice, I logged into our online banking. That's when I noticed something unusual. The money hadn't been transferred to my wife's personal account. It had gone straight into her brother's business account. I turned the screen toward my attorney. She narrowed her eyes, suddenly more interested. That's not normal. If your wife and her brother are mixing personal and business finances, especially during a pending divorce, that could be a serious problem. Do you have access to any other shared financial accounts? She asked. I did. While my wife had wiped out our primary checking account, she hadn't touched the online savings account linked to it. Access required separate login credentials, and I rarely checked it since that money was reserved for our children's college funds. When I finally logged in, my stomach dropped. Over the past 6 months, there had been multiple transfers, each one moving money from our savings directly into her brother's business. The total? Nearly $26,000. Money meant for our children's future. I turned the screen back to my attorney. Her expression hardened. Do you know exactly what your brother-in-law does? She asked. Real estate development. I replied, he buys properties, renovates them, and sells them for profit. At least, that's what he always brags about. She exhaled sharply. Print all of these statements. I'm also recommending a forensic accountant I work with. It turned out that my brother-in-law's successful business had been anything but. For the past year, he had been drowning in debt. He had overextended himself on a real estate project, only for the zoning commission to reject his permit applications. His investments had tanked. Based on the transaction dates, it became clear my wife had been secretly funneling our family's money to keep his failing business afloat. The attorney leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. This changes everything. We're no longer just dealing with a divorce. This could be fraud, especially if these transfers were made without your knowledge or consent. Her instructions were clear. Don't confront my wife yet. Continue gathering every shred of evidence. Meet with the forensic accountant. Immediately open a new account at a different bank for my upcoming paychecks. That evening, my wife texted. She demanded that I sign preliminary separation papers her attorney had drawn up. She wanted me to meet at her brother's house the next day to finalize everything and set a date for me to move out. I replied calmly, I'll be reviewing everything with my attorney first. Her response was instant and hostile. Don't waste money on a lawyer. You can't afford one anyway. Just sign the papers and stop making this harder than it needs to be. And just like that, exactly 48 hours after my wife's ultimatum and her brother keying my car, the battle lines were drawn. The confrontation. Another message from my wife lit up my phone. We need to talk. Come to my brother's house. At 7 p.m., bring the separation papers. I ran it by my attorney first. She strongly advised against going alone and suggested I record the conversation, since our state allowed one-party consent. Most importantly, she told me not to sign anything. Taking her advice, I asked my sister to come with me. When we arrived at my brother-in-law's lavish home in an upscale neighborhood, my wife answered the door. Her expression tightened when she saw I wasn't alone. What is she doing here? She demanded. She's here as a witness. I responded evenly. I thought it would be best to have a neutral party present. My wife exhaled sharply but stepped aside to let us in. Inside the spacious living room, my brother-in-law sat in an oversized armchair, exuding arrogance as if presiding over a courtroom. My children were nowhere in sight. Where are the kids? I asked. At a friend's house. My wife answered dismissively. This isn't a social call. At first, the discussion remained civil. She spoke about wanting a clean break and assured me her lawyer had advised her on what she was entitled to. But when I asked the name of this lawyer, both she and her brother grew noticeably uneasy. That's not important right now. My brother-in-law interjected. What matters is that you sign these papers and agree to move out by the end of the week. I took the papers but didn't sign them. Instead, I set them down on the coffee table and looked at both of them. I've been doing some research of my own, I said, and I've come across some interesting transactions from our savings account. My wife's face paled. Her brother shifted uncomfortably. I don't know what you're talking about, she muttered, her confidence wavering. I'm talking about the $26,000 you transferred to your brother's business account over the past 6 months, I said steadily. money from our children's college fund. My brother-in-law immediately got to his feet. "You should leave," he said, his voice sharp. "I intend to," I replied. "But first, I want to know why my wife drained our accounts and funneled our savings into your business." My wife's tone turned defensive. "It was a loan," she snapped. "An investment. It's going to pay off." "A loan I never agreed to," I countered, "for a business that, from what I've learned, is already failing." That struck a nerve. My brother-in-law stepped closer, his face darkening with anger. "My business is none of your concern." "It became my concern when you took my children's college money." I shot back. "My attorney believes the court will find these transactions very interesting. So might the IRS, considering there's no loan agreement and no reported interest." The mention of the IRS landed like a grenade. I saw the immediate flicker of panic in both of them. My brother-in-law's real estate empire, it seemed, was already under scrutiny. "You're bluffing," my wife said, but her voice lacked conviction. I reached into my bag and pulled out the bank statements my attorney had advised me to bring. No bluff, just facts. What followed was 30 minutes of chaos, accusations, denials, and ultimately the unraveling of the truth. My brother-in-law's business was indeed on the verge of collapse. He had convinced my wife to secretly siphon money from our accounts, promising that his latest investment would yield enormous returns. But when his business continued to spiral, the scheme evolved. She would divorce me, take as much as possible in the settlement, and use that money to bail him out. Finally, my brother-in-law sneered. "You had no right to dig into my business. And you had no right to my money." I shot back. Or to key my car, for that matter. Up until this moment, my sister had been quietly observing. Now, she spoke for the first time, holding up her phone. "I recorded this entire conversation," she announced. "Just so we're all clear on what's been admitted here." The atmosphere shifted instantly. My wife looked horrified. My brother-in-law looked like he might explode. "That's illegal," he barked. "Actually, it's not," I said, meeting his glare. "This is a one-party consent state. My attorney advised me to document everything." And just like that, they realized they had lost control of the narrative. The aftermath. I rose from my seat, gathered the bank statements, and made my way to the door with my sister. Just before stepping out, I turned back to my wife. "I want to see the kids tomorrow," I stated firmly, "and I expect every cent you withdrew from our account to be returned by noon. If not, my attorney will be filing emergency motions first thing Monday morning." She stood there, pale and silent, then gave a slow nod. By the next day, the money was back in our joint account. Following my lawyer's advice, I immediately transferred it to my new account. That afternoon, my wife brought the children home, saying she needed time to think. I didn't press her for answers. Instead, I focused on spending the day with my kids, keeping the conversation light, shielding them from the chaos that had unfolded. Come Monday, my attorney officially filed for divorce, citing financial misconduct. She also submitted motions for temporary orders regarding the house, custody arrangements, and full financial disclosures. The documented transfers, paired with a recorded confession, gave us significant legal leverage. The court responded swiftly, ordering an in-depth financial audit to track any further siphoning of funds to my brother-in-law's failing business. In the meantime, I was granted temporary custody of the children, while my wife was required to find separate living arrangements. Staying with her brother was out of question, as it raised concerns about witness tampering. As a forensic accountant dug deeper, the full extent of the scheme unraveled. My brother-in-law hadn't just persuaded my wife to drain our savings. He had plans to use our home as collateral for a loan once she secured it in the divorce. His financial troubles were far worse than he let on, with creditors circling like vultures. He had, in essence, manipulated my wife into seeing our marriage as nothing more than a financial resource to keep his failing enterprise afloat. Faced with undeniable evidence of her brother's deceit and her own misguided choices, my wife eventually agreed to a settlement that was fair to both of us and, most importantly, protected the children's well-being. She admitted that her brother had convinced her I was reckless with money and that securing control of our assets was the only way to guarantee stability for her and the kids. She truly believed his assurances that the business would recover, making her investment worthwhile. As for my brother-in-law, the IRS took a keen interest in his financial dealings once the divorce proceedings brought them to light. Last I heard, he was facing fraud and tax evasion charges tied to other investors he had duped. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. We now share custody of the children, though I have primary physical custody to maintain consistency in their lives. I kept the house, ensuring they had a stable home. My ex-wife, now living in a small apartment across town, is slowly trying to rebuild her relationship with both the kids and reality. She has admitted how blind she was to her brother's manipulation and how she let his illusion of success cloud her judgment. Even now, I sometimes find it hard to grasp how drastically my life shifted. How the woman I trusted for 13 years could turn against me so completely, believing her brother's lies over the truth. While she saw me as the problem, he was the one bleeding us dry all along. But in the 48 hours between her cold betrayal and the moment they realized her plan had crumbled, I learned something invaluable. Standing up for myself, strategically, not impulsively, was the most powerful move I could have made. My car still carries a scratch from a night my brother-in-law dragged his key across it. I could have had it fixed by now, but I've left it there. A reminder that sometimes the best response isn't immediate retaliation, but playing the long game, and that even an ordinary mechanic can outmaneuver those who think they're smarter than him.